The night that changed everything. The night was painted in soft golden lights, and the quiet hum of excitement filled the air. Cameras flashed from every corner, fans screamed names, and the red carpet glowed beneath polished shoes and elegant gowns. It was the world premiere of their long-awaited movie, and everyone knew the moment Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves would step out, the night would stop breathing for a while. Sandra arrived first. Her calm smile, graceful walk, and the subtle shimmer of her silver dress captured every heart around. She had always been known for her elegance, but tonight there was something deeper in her eyes, something that looked both peaceful and heavy at the same time. As she waved and moved along the carpet, flashes followed her every move. Yet her mind seemed to drift somewhere far away. And then a soft wave of noise spread through the crowd. The flashes grew faster. The cheers grew louder. Keanu Reeves had arrived. Dressed simply in his usual calm, grounded style, he carried an aura that made everything else fade. As he stepped closer, the fans screamed his name, but his eyes searched for one person. When he saw her standing near the giant poster of their movie, he paused for a second, as if time had quietly whispered something only he could hear. For years, people had talked about them, their chemistry, their friendship, the quiet way they seemed to understand each other without words. And even though they had never confirmed anything, the world always believed there was more between them than just two actors who once shared a screen. When he finally reached her, the cameras caught a rare softness in his smile. Sandra turned, their eyes met, and for a brief second the noise faded into silence. There was something different tonight, something no one could name, but everyone could feel. As they posed together, reporters shouted questions. How does it feel to reunite? What's your secret connection? Are you two finally going to tell the world the truth? They laughed it off like they always did, polite, humble, never feeding the fire. But those who truly watched them, those who paid attention to the small details, noticed the slight tremble in her hand, the deep breath he took before answering. When they moved toward the stage for the main event, Sandra leaned slightly toward him and whispered something. No one could hear it, but Keanu's expression changed. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightened, and his usual calm turned into quiet focus. What she said would stay a mystery, but it planted a seed that was about to grow into something unforgettable. Inside the theater, the audience settled. The premiere began, but Keanu seemed distant. His hands rested together, his mind far from the screen. Every few minutes, his eyes shifted toward Sandra, who was sitting 2 seats away, her attention fixed forward, yet her fingers nervously traced the hem of her dress. Something between them was unspoken, waiting to be revealed. As the final scene played, the entire hall erupted into applause. The film was beautiful, emotional, filled with the kind of chemistry only they could create. But before the applause could fade, Keanu stood up. At first, people thought he was just being polite, but then he walked toward the center of the stage. The lights dimmed slightly and the crowd grew quiet again, sensing something unexpected. Sandra turned, confused. He motioned for her to come closer. She hesitated for a moment, then stood. The crowd watched as she joined him on stage. The host, unsure of what was happening, stepped back. The cameras zoomed in. The fans leaned forward. It was as if every heart in the room forgot how to beat. Keanu looked at her, then at the audience. His voice, calm but slightly shaky, carried across the theater. "There's something I've wanted to say for a long time," he began. The crowd fell silent. Sandra's eyes widened, and she whispered his name softly, almost in disbelief. He smiled gently, the kind that hides years of quiet emotions. "We've shared the screen, we've shared laughter, and we've shared moments that only we understand," he continued. "But what I've never shared is what's been in my heart all along." A soft gasp moved through the room. Sandra's hands trembled slightly. The flashes went wild, but Keanu's eyes stayed only on her. "Life has taught me many lessons," he said. "It's taught me patience, kindness, and how to stay grounded even when the world is loud. But there's one thing I learned that I never expected, that sometimes the person who makes you feel most at peace is right beside you, all along." Sandra took a step closer, her lips parted, her eyes shining with tears she tried to hide. "Keanu," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. He reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out a small box. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The entire hall froze. Cameras clicked. Hearts raced, and Sandra covered her mouth, her body trembling as she realized what was happening. Keanu knelt down on one knee. A wave of shock swept through the crowd. Gasps, cries, cheers, disbelief. The noise grew but quickly softened when his voice returned, low and filled with honesty. "I know life has not been easy for either of us," he said. "We've both seen pain, loss, and silence that changes people. But through it all, I've learned what real respect looks like, what true friendship feels like, and how love can exist quietly without needing to shout." Tears rolled down her cheeks. The world seemed to disappear around them. "Sandra," he said, his voice breaking just slightly, "you've been the calm in every storm I've faced. And if there's one truth I want to live by from this day forward, it's that I never want to walk through another storm without you." For a moment, she stood frozen. She could hear her heartbeat echoing louder than the applause beginning to rise. Every flash of the camera felt distant, unreal. She looked at him. This man who had carried pain with grace, who had always chosen kindness over pride, and something inside her finally broke free. But just as she took a step forward, the lights above flickered. A small tremor of sound came from the backstage area. The crowd turned in confusion. Keanu stood, protective instinct rising immediately. Sandra blinked, trying to understand what was happening. Security moved quietly toward the side curtains. And then, from the corner of the hall, a familiar face appeared. Someone from her past. Someone she never expected to see again. The applause stopped. The lights dimmed further. The air turned heavy. Sandra's lips parted as she whispered a name she hadn't spoken in years. The entire theater fell into silence. The proposal wasn't the only surprise that night. The face from the past. The silence in the theater felt heavier than words. Cameras lowered, voices faded, and every flash of light seemed to freeze mid-air. Sandra stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the man walking slowly toward the stage. Keanu turned slightly, his body tense but calm, as if instinctively preparing to protect her. The man's expression was unreadable. His suit looked formal, but his presence carried something sharp, something unsettling. He wasn't part of the press nor a member of the crew. People whispered in confusion, wondering who he was and why he had walked in at that exact moment, when the world was waiting for an answer to the most unexpected proposal of the year. Sandra's lips trembled. Her fingers clutched the edge of her dress. "It can't be," she whispered under her breath. The man stopped a few feet away from the stage, looking up at her with eyes filled with unspoken memories. "Sandra," he said softly, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't come here to cause a scene." But he already had. Keanu glanced at the security team, giving them a calm signal to wait. He didn't want chaos. Instead, he took a slow step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Sandra. "Who are you?" he asked in his quiet, steady tone. The man smiled faintly. "Someone who once promised her forever," he said. The words fell like a stone into still water. Gasps spread through the crowd. Even the cameras paused for a moment, unsure whether to capture this or turn away. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting to stay composed. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Ethan, why are you here?" The name sent a ripple through the room. Keanu looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. The man, Ethan, stepped closer. "I saw the news," he said. "I saw that tonight you were celebrating a movie about love, about second chances. I thought maybe this was my chance too." Sandra's heart pounded. Years of buried emotions rose like waves crashing against the shore. She had not seen Ethan in more than a decade. Their story had ended painfully, quietly, and without closure. He had walked away when she needed him most. She had forgiven him long ago, but the memory had never truly faded. Keanu's gaze remained steady. "This isn't the place," he said calmly. "Whatever you came to say, it can wait." Ethan's eyes shifted toward Keanu. "You must be the reason she never looked back," he said. "The man who replaced me in every story, every smile, every quiet moment she never explained." Sandra shook her head. "Ethan, stop!" she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You don't know what you're saying," but he wasn't listening. The emotion in his voice grew sharper. "I just wanted a moment with her," he said, "before you take everything I lost." The audience watched, stunned. Reporters hesitated to move their cameras. The director whispered something to the crew, asking to dim the lights even further. Keanu took a slow breath, then gently turned to Sandra. "Do you want to talk to him?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I thought that part of my life was gone." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes the past doesn't knock," he said. "It just walks in." His calmness grounded her. She turned back to Ethan, her voice steady but distant. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "This night isn't about what we lost. It's about what we've learned." Ethan looked down, his expression cracking with regret. "I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry," he said, "for leaving, for not being the person you needed. I saw the news and I realized too late what I threw away." The words hit her deeply. She had dreamed of hearing them years ago when silence was all she got. But now, standing under blinding lights, beside a man who had shown her quiet respect and endless patience, the apology no longer carried the same weight. She took a deep breath. "You don't need to be sorry anymore," she said gently. "I forgave you long before tonight." A soft murmur passed through the crowd. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "Then why does it still hurt?" he asked. She looked at him with kindness. "Because forgiveness doesn't erase the past," she said. "It only helps us carry it without hate." The hall fell silent again. For a moment, the tension turned into something softer. Not scandal, but healing. Ethan nodded slowly, wiped his face, and stepped back. "You deserve peace," she said quietly. "And I hope you find it." He smiled faintly. "So do you," he whispered. Then, turning toward Keanu, he added, "Take care of her. She deserves more than the silence she lived through." Keanu gave a small nod. "She'll never have to face silence again," he replied. The man turned and walked away. The crowd, sensing something sacred had just happened, stayed quiet. No one clapped. No one shouted. Even the flashes softened. When the doors closed behind Ethan, Sandra turned back toward Keanu. Her hands shook slightly. "I didn't expect that," she said, her voice trembling. Keanu reached out, gently holding her hand. "Life never asks for timing," he said softly. "It just gives us moments and waits to see what we do with them." Her eyes filled with tears again, not of pain but of release. The audience slowly began to applaud, a gentle wave of respect rising through the hall. But as Keanu lifted the ring box again, ready to continue what had been interrupted, a sudden announcement echoed through the speakers. "Please, everyone remain calm," said a voice from backstage. "There's been an unexpected situation outside. We ask everyone to stay inside until it's clear." The music stopped. People turned toward the exits, uneasy. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a worried look. "What now?" she whispered. Keanu tightened his grip on her hand, his calm voice cutting through the growing noise. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "we'll face it together." But as the large theater doors burst open and flashes from outside flooded the room, Sandra realized this night was only just beginning, and the real story hadn't even started yet. The storm outside, the theater lights flickered again as murmurs filled the room. Outside, the sound of sirens echoed faintly, mixed with the chatter of journalists who had rushed toward the entrance. The voice from the speakers repeated calmly, "Please remain seated. Everything is under control." But the calm tone didn't match the unease that had spread through the crowd. Sandra's heart raced. She looked at Keanu, who stood still, his expression focused but composed. He squeezed her hand lightly, the same way he always did when things felt uncertain. "Stay close to me," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the entrance. Security guards moved quickly toward the main doors, forming a line. Behind them, flashes from outside cameras created bursts of white light, almost blinding through the glass panels. The host tried to lighten the mood, saying something about a technical delay, but no one was listening anymore. Sandra's thoughts drifted back to Ethan for a brief second. His sudden appearance had shaken her, but something about his eyes lingered in her mind. Not guilt, but worry. He had said he came to apologize, but had he also come to warn her? Keanu leaned closer and said softly, "Whatever happens, don't panic. We'll figure it out." His calm tone grounded her again. It was one of the many things she admired about him. Even when everything seemed to fall apart, he stayed steady. Then the doors opened. A rush of cold air entered the hall. Outside, a swarm of reporters tried to push through, shouting questions about the proposal, about Ethan, about the incident. The word made people sit straighter. Some audience members pulled out their phones, trying to understand what was happening. A man from the event staff ran up the aisle and whispered something to the stage manager. Sandra noticed the man's pale face and the way his hands trembled slightly. Keanu caught it too. The manager nodded, then looked toward them. "Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Bullock," he said carefully. "We may need to escort you both to the back room for safety." "There's been a disturbance outside the theater," Sandra frowned. "What kind of disturbance?" she asked. The manager hesitated. "We're not sure yet. The police are handling it." Keanu looked around the theater, scanning faces. "No one looks hurt," he said quietly. "Maybe it's just a false alarm, but deep down," Sandra felt it wasn't. She didn't know why, but her chest tightened with the same uneasy feeling she'd had moments before Ethan appeared. As they were led backstage, the audience buzzed with confusion. Whispers grew louder. Some people clapped awkwardly, trying to turn the tension into something lighter, but most sat in silence, staring at the stage where, only minutes ago, one of Hollywood's most private men had been about to propose. Once they entered the narrow hallway behind the curtains, the noise faded slightly. It smelled of metal, fabric, and stage dust, the quiet world behind the glamour. Sandra walked beside Keanu, still holding his hand. "This night keeps changing," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Life has a way of testing our patience when we least expect it." They reached a small lounge area where event staff had gathered. A few of them were talking rapidly on their phones. One young assistant approached them, nervous but polite. "Please wait here for a moment," she said. "Security is checking the entrance." There might have been a small commotion involving paparazzi. Sandra nodded, though her unease didn't fade. She turned toward Keanu. "You think it's really just paparazzi?" He shook his head slowly. "Maybe, but maybe not. We'll know soon." He sat down on a couch near the wall and motioned for her to sit beside him. She did, her hands still trembling slightly. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was protective. After a few moments, a security officer entered. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes carried the weight of a long night. "Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Bullock," he said firmly. "We've confirmed the area is safe now. There was an individual outside causing a disturbance. He's been taken into custody." Sandra frowned. "Who was it?" The officer hesitated, then replied, "The same man who came inside earlier." Her heart dropped. "Ethan?" The officer nodded. "He didn't hurt anyone, but he seemed agitated. He was shouting something about needing to tell the truth. We had to remove him for safety reasons." Keanu's expression darkened slightly, though his tone stayed calm. "Did he say what truth?" The officer shook his head. "No, sir. But he mentioned something about a letter. We didn't find anything on him." Sandra sat back, confused. "A letter?" she repeated softly. The officer nodded again. "He said it was for you. He kept saying he had to deliver it before it was too late." For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the crowd outside seemed distant. Sandra looked down, her mind racing. What letter could he have meant? And why now, after all these years? Keanu reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "Don't let his words shake you," he said quietly. "Whatever this is, we'll face it together." She met his eyes, feeling the warmth in his calm gaze. "You always say that," she whispered. He smiled softly. "Because I always mean it." Before they could say anything more, the door opened again. The event manager entered with a phone in his hand. "Sorry to interrupt," he said carefully, "but there's something you both should see." He placed the phone on the table. A live feed from a news channel was playing. Outside the theater, reporters were gathered in a frenzy. The headline running across the bottom of the screen made Sandra's heart freeze. Former actor Ethan Hayes claims he holds evidence about Keanu Reeves's secret promise to Sandra Bullock. Keanu's calm expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. Sandra stared at the screen, disbelief washing over her. "What promise?" she asked softly. The manager looked uneasy. We don't know yet. He said he had proof. He was shouting it before the police took him away. The room grew still again. Sandra turned toward Keanu, searching his face. Is there something I should know? She asked gently. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his seat. For the first time that night, his silence carried weight, not confusion, but reflection. There's something I never told anyone, he said quietly. And maybe it's time you heard it. Her heart pounded faster. Outside, the crowd chanted their names, unaware that behind the curtains, something far more personal was unfolding. What is it, Keanu? She asked softly. He looked into her eyes, his voice calm but filled with something deep, a memory he had buried long ago. Years ago, he said slowly, when we finished our first movie together, I made a promise. Not to the world, not to the press, but to someone who meant everything to both of us. She frowned slightly. Who? He hesitated. Your mother. The air left her lungs. She stared at him, unable to speak. The silence that followed was heavier than applause, deeper than shock. The promise he never broke. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. She stared at Keanu, her voice trembling slightly as she whispered, My mother? Keanu nodded slowly. His eyes softened, but there was a deep sadness behind them, the kind that comes from holding something for too long. The soft hum of noise outside faded into silence. The room felt smaller, heavier, as if time had folded into itself. Sandra leaned forward, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. Keanu, what do you mean? When did you speak to her? He looked down for a moment, his voice steady but quiet. Years ago, right after we finished filming our first movie together. You were going through a difficult time. You didn't talk about it, but everyone could see the weight you carried. One day, your mother came to the set. She wanted to thank everyone, but she waited until everyone left before she spoke to me. Sandra's heart pounded. She remembered that time. The late nights, the quiet tears, the way her mother tried to stay strong even as her health declined. She hadn't known that Keanu had spoken to her privately. She told me something that night, he continued. She said she didn't know how much time she had left, but she was at peace because she knew you'd always have people who truly cared about you. Then she asked me for one thing, a promise. Sandra swallowed hard. What promise? He looked into her eyes. She made me promise that no matter what life threw at you, fame, loneliness, heartbreak, or loss, I would never let you feel like you were alone. She said, you're one of the few people who understands her silence. Don't let her face the world's noise without someone who hears it. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking her head slowly. She never told me that, she whispered. She didn't want you to know, he said gently. She said it would make you feel guilty. She wanted it to be quiet, natural. Not a duty, not a favor, but a promise that came from the heart. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of that memory filled the air. Sandra's tears rolled silently, and Keanu, watching her carefully, reached out and took her hand. I tried to keep that promise, he said softly. Even when we drifted apart, even when our lives went in different directions. I watched you from afar, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Every time you smiled again after losing something, I remembered her words. Sandra nodded slowly, tears still glistening on her face. She always liked you, she said with a trembling laugh. She said there was something rare about you, something gentle. Keanu smiled faintly. She was the gentle one. I only learned from her. The room was quiet except for the distant murmurs of security staff outside. The world beyond the door had become chaos. But inside this small lounge, it was just two souls finally facing the truth they had avoided for years. So when Ethan said he had a letter, she said softly, her voice fragile, You think he knew about this? Keanu frowned slightly. I don't know. Maybe he found something. Maybe your mother left more behind than we thought. She thought for a moment, then whispered, There was a box. I remember it. She told me not to open it until I found peace. I never did. I couldn't, Keanu nodded. Then maybe that's what this is about. Maybe she knew this moment would come. Before they could say more, the door opened. A police officer stepped in, followed by the event manager. Their expressions were calm but serious. "We've cleared the area," the officer said. "Everything's safe now. But we found something outside the main entrance. It was addressed to you, Mrs. Bullock." Sandra's heart skipped a beat. "To me?" The officer nodded and handed her a sealed envelope. Her name was written in soft, curved handwriting, one she hadn't seen in years. Her hands trembled as she took it. Keanu leaned closer. "Is that—" She nodded, unable to speak. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was her mother's. The room seemed to disappear around her as she slowly broke the seal. The paper inside was old, slightly faded, but the words were clear. She read silently, her eyes moving slowly across each line. Then tears filled her eyes again. Not of pain, but of something deeper. "What does it say?" Keanu asked softly. She looked up at him, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "She wrote this before she passed," she whispered. She said there would come a day when the world would test me, when everything would feel uncertain again. And when that day came, I would meet someone who reminded me what peace felt like. Her voice broke. "She wrote your name." Keanu's breath caught for a second. "She did?" Sandra nodded, wiping her tears. She said, "If that man ever looks at you the way he did when he thought no one was watching, don't let fear silence what love has been trying to say for years." Keanu sat back slowly, his eyes lowered, absorbing the words. "She saw it long before we did," he said quietly. "She always did," Sandra whispered. For a while, they sat together in silence, holding the letter between them like a bridge between past and present. The noise from the theater faded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace neither had felt in years. Then Keanu looked at her again. "That's why I made the promise," he said softly. "Not just to protect you, but to remind you, even when the world forgets kindness, you can still live by it." She smiled through her tears. "You kept it," she said. "I tried," he replied, but before the warmth could fully settle in, the door burst open again. One of the staff members rushed in, holding a phone. "You need to see this," she said urgently. She handed the phone to Keanu. On the screen was a live feed from outside the theater, news reporters, flashing cameras, and a police car. But the headline running across the screen wasn't about the movie or the proposal anymore. "Mystery letter reveals emotional truth behind Keanu Reeves's secret promise, but another letter still missing." Keanu frowned. "Another letter?" The staff member nodded. "The police said there were supposed to be two, one for her and one for you. The second one is missing." Sandra's eyes widened. "Then who has it?" The officer standing by the door spoke quietly. "We think Ethan took it." The air went cold. Sandra stood, her pulse quickening. "Why would he take it?" Keanu's voice was calm, but his jaw tightened slightly. "Because he doesn't know the truth," he said. "He thinks the promise was about love. But it wasn't. It was about protection. And he may believe it's about him." Sandra looked at him, fear rising in her chest. "What if he tries to use it?" Keanu stood up, his calm presence turning firm. "Then we'll find him," he said. "And we'll finish what her letter started." She looked at him for a long moment, the weight of everything pressing down on her heart. "Keanu," she whispered, "what if this is too much? What if the world turns this into something ugly?" He reached out, gently brushing away a tear from her cheek. "Then we'll remind the world that truth doesn't need to be loud," he said softly. "It just needs to be real." And for the first time that night, she smiled through her tears. But outside, the reporters were already spinning their own stories. And somewhere in the dark streets beyond the theater, Ethan held the missing letter in his hand, the one that carried the final words of a woman whose last wish was about to change all their lives forever. The missing letter. The night had grown colder. Outside the theater, the crowd had thinned, but the air still carried tension. Flashing lights from news cameras painted the streets in shades of blue and white, and the whispers of reporters lingered like restless wind. Inside, the noise had quieted, but the silence between Sandra and Keanu was filled with a new kind of weight, the knowledge that something sacred was missing. Ethan had vanished into the night with the second letter. No one knew where he went or what he planned to do. The police had searched the nearby streets but found nothing. Keanu sat near the backstage window, his hands clasped together, watching the rain begin to fall. Sandra stood near the doorway, holding her mother's letter close to her chest, afraid to let it go. After a long moment, she spoke softly. "Do you think he'll read it?" Keanu turned his head slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe he already has. And if he did?" she asked. "Then he knows something we don't," he said quietly. She looked down at the floor. "I don't understand why he would take it." He said he wanted to apologize. He looked like he meant it. Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes regret makes people desperate. Maybe he thinks that letter will give him a second chance." She sighed and sat beside him. "He was part of my past. I thought it was closed. But tonight, it feels like every unfinished story is finding its way back." He looked at her with calm understanding. "Maybe that's what life does before it gives you peace. It brings everything back, one last time, to see if you're ready to let it go." Her eyes softened. "You always find peace in words, don't you?" "Only because I've lived enough noise," he said with a faint smile. Before they could say more, a knock echoed at the door. A police officer entered with a small notebook in his hand. "We've located Ethan," he said. "He's at a cafe near the boulevard. He asked to see both of you privately." Sandra's heartbeat quickened. "Is he all right?" "He's calm," the officer said. "He said he doesn't want trouble. He just wants to give you something." Keanu stood up immediately. "We'll go," he said. The officer nodded. "We'll escort you there quietly." Minutes later, they were in a car driving through the dim streets. Raindrops tapped softly against the windows. Sandra looked out at the reflections of streetlights on the wet pavement, her thoughts heavy. Keanu sat beside her, silent, his eyes steady. She could sense he was thinking, not about the danger, but about what the letter might reveal. When they arrived, the cafe was nearly empty. The lights inside were warm, flickering softly against the windows. Ethan sat at a corner table, his hands around a cup of untouched coffee. When he saw them enter, he stood slowly, his expression tired but calm. The officer stayed near the door while Keanu and Sandra walked toward him. Ethan looked at Sandra first. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. She nodded, her voice soft. "You have the letter, don't you?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. It was identical to the one she had received except for the name written on it, Keanu Reeves. He placed it gently on the table. "I didn't mean to take it," he said. I didn't know what to do when I found it. I thought it might change everything." Keanu sat down, his voice steady. "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "Because I thought it would prove something. That maybe I was the one she meant to protect, not you. I thought your promise to her was what kept us apart." Sandra frowned slightly. "Ethan, you left long before that." "It wasn't Keanu. It was you." He looked down, ashamed. "I know. But when I saw the news tonight, when I saw you two together, it felt like I was being erased from the story. And when the officer mentioned the letter, I thought maybe it held something that explained everything." He slid the letter toward Keanu. "But I read it, and it didn't say what I expected." Keanu's eyes stayed on him. "What did it say?" Ethan took a deep breath. "It said the same thing as hers, but different. It wasn't about protecting her. It was about you. She wrote that you had carried too much pain alone, and that the world would misunderstand your silence. She said you were the kind of man who helped others heal but never let anyone help you. And she asked you to promise that when you finally met peace, you wouldn't push it away." Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered with something unspoken. A memory, a recognition. Sandra looked at him quietly. "She knew both of us," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "She did, and she wanted you both to find each other. Not through fame, not through stories, but through truth." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I shouldn't have taken it. I just didn't understand that the letter wasn't meant for me. It was meant for the person who already kept her promise." He pushed the letter closer. "This belongs to you." Keanu reached out slowly and took it. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked at Ethan and said quietly, "You didn't ruin anything. You just helped the story finish what it started." Ethan looked relieved, though his eyes still glistened with guilt. I'll leave town after tonight, he said softly. I've said what I needed to say. I hope you both find peace. Sandra nodded gently. You should forgive yourself, Ethan. That's the only way to move forward. He smiled faintly. Maybe tonight was the start. Then he walked out into the rain, disappearing into the quiet streets. For a while, neither Sandra nor Keanu spoke. The cafe was silent except for the soft hum of rain against the glass. Finally, Keanu opened the envelope. Inside was a short, handwritten letter. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. He read aloud softly. Keanu, if you're reading this, it means the world has tested you again. I know your heart, gentle, patient, and kind, but I also know how easily you carry other people's pain as your own. My daughter will need someone who understands silence the way you do, and you will need someone who brings light into that silence. Don't run from what feels real. Love doesn't ask for attention, only truth. When you look at her, remember this. The world may watch, but peace belongs to both of you. When he finished reading, the silence stretched between them. Sandra's eyes filled again, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. She knew us before we did, she whispered. He nodded slowly, his voice quiet. She believed in something we were too afraid to name. The rain outside grew stronger, but inside the air felt lighter. The weight of years, of promises and distance, had begun to lift. Sandra reached across the table and placed her hand over his. So what happens now? She asked softly. He looked at her for a long moment, the calm warmth returning to his expression. Now, he said gently, we keep her promise alive. Not just in words, in how we live? She smiled faintly. Then maybe we should start by finishing what was interrupted tonight. He smiled back, his eyes soft. You mean, she nodded, the proposal. For the first time, he laughed quietly, a warm, genuine sound that filled the empty cafe. You always had a way of turning pain into something beautiful, he said. She squeezed his hand gently. And you always had a way of reminding me what peace feels like. They sat there in silence. Two souls who had finally found the missing piece of a story written long before they even knew it existed. But as they left the cafe, walking into the gentle rain together, Keanu's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his smile fading slightly. A message had appeared. No name, just words. The letters weren't the only thing she left behind. He looked at Sandra, who was still smiling softly under the rain. He didn't tell her what the message said. Not yet. Because he knew the night still had one more truth waiting, one that could change everything again. The truth that set them free, the rain had turned gentle by the time they reached Keanu's car. Drops slid quietly down the windshield, shimmering beneath the streetlights. The world outside felt slower, quieter, almost as if it, too, was waiting for what came next. Sandra sat beside him, her head resting lightly against the seat. Her mother's letter still in her hands. Keanu's phone lay on the dashboard, the message glowing softly on the screen. The letters weren't the only thing she left behind. He hadn't shown it to her yet. Not because he wanted to keep it secret, but because he didn't want to break the fragile peace that had finally settled between them. For the first time in years, they weren't running from anything. They were simply together. Two people who had carried the world's noise long enough to understand the value of silence. After a few quiet minutes, Sandra whispered, I never thought I'd hear her voice again, but tonight it felt like she was with us. Keanu nodded. Maybe she never left, he said softly. Maybe she's been guiding us the whole time, Sandra smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. She always said love was just another word for guidance. That it doesn't demand, it just leads quietly. Keanu turned to look at her, his expression filled with calm warmth. She was right, he said, but his thoughts returned to the message. Something about it didn't feel random. The wording and the timing, it felt intentional. Someone knew about the letters. Someone wanted him to find something more. He started the car, the engine humming softly. There's something I need to check, he said. But I don't want to scare you. She turned to him, curious. What is it? He picked up the phone and showed her the message. She read it carefully, her face tightening slightly. Who sent this? No number, he said. It's just blank, she frowned. You think it's Ethan? He shook his head. No, his part in this is done. This feels different. She looked at him quietly. Then what do you think she left behind? He thought for a moment, then said softly, something we haven't looked for yet. And without saying another word, he began to drive. The streets were quiet. The rain painted the city in soft reflections, every light stretching across the wet ground like threads of memory. They didn't need to speak. Both knew where he was going. The old house. The place Sandra's mother had lived before she passed. It was just outside the city, surrounded by tall trees and wild ivy that had slowly claimed the gate. Sandra hadn't been there in years. She had avoided it, unable to face the weight of what it represented. When the car stopped, she hesitated for a moment before stepping out. The house looked smaller now, softer under the pale glow of the night. Keanu walked beside her, their steps slow and quiet. Are you sure you're ready? He asked gently. She nodded. I think I have been for a long time. I just didn't know how to be. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and wood. The furniture was covered with white sheets. The photos on the walls faded but still warm. The house felt frozen in time, untouched yet alive with echoes. Sandra ran her hand across the old piano near the window. She used to play this every morning, she whispered. Even when her hands hurt, she'd still play. Keanu smiled softly. She believed in rhythm, not just in music, but in life. They moved toward the study, the place her mother used to write letters. The desk still stood near the window, stacked with old notebooks and framed pictures. And then Sandra noticed something. One of the drawers was slightly open, but inside, beneath some folded papers, there was a small wooden box. It was carved with delicate patterns, the same design her mother used to draw on her letters. Her breath caught. This wasn't here before, she whispered. Keanu stepped closer. Maybe it was waiting for the right time. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a single cassette tape, labeled in her mother's handwriting, "For the both of you." Her hands trembled as she held it. She left a recording. Keanu looked around the room and found an old cassette player on a nearby shelf. He brushed off the dust, checked the batteries, and carefully placed the tape inside. When he pressed play, the soft crackle of old tape filled the room, followed by a voice, gentle, warm, and unmistakably hers. If you're hearing this, it means you both found each other. I knew you would. The world may have changed around you, but I believed one truth would never fade, that love born from kindness never dies. Sandra pressed a hand to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Keanu, you once told me you didn't believe in fate. You said life was just choices and consequences. But I told you, sometimes the heart chooses before the mind does. You took care of my daughter when she didn't even realize she needed it. You carried her peace when she couldn't carry her own. For that, I thank you. Keanu's eyes softened, his throat tightening. And Sandra, my love, if you're listening, stop running from happiness. It doesn't erase the pain. It just teaches you how to hold it gently. If this world gives you someone who listens without judgment, who sees your silence as beauty, don't let go. That kind of love doesn't come twice. The tape clicked softly and her voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. When the world watches you, they'll only see the story. But you two, you'll know the truth. What you have isn't for the cameras or the fans or the noise. It's for the quiet moments, when no one is looking. That's where love really lives. The tape ended with a soft hum, then silence. Sandra closed her eyes, tears rolling freely down her cheeks. Keanu turned off the player and sat beside her on the floor. Neither of them spoke for a while. The rain outside had stopped. Only the soft creak of the house filled the air. Finally, Sandra whispered, I think this was her real promise. Not the one she made you say out loud. The one she left between the lines. Keanu nodded. To remind us that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. She turned to him, her eyes red but shining. You think she knew we'd end up here? He smiled gently. I think she knew we'd need to. They sat there for a long time, the two of them surrounded by the quiet beauty of everything she had left behind. Not wealth, not fame, but something far greater, understanding. As dawn began to rise, light poured through the window, soft and golden. Sandra stood, walking toward the doorway, then turned back. "You know," she said softly, "she'd probably laugh if she saw how dramatic tonight was." Keanu chuckled quietly. "She'd say we turned her love story into a mystery movie." She smiled through her tears. "Maybe it was both." He stood and walked toward her, the morning light catching his face. "So what now?" he asked gently. She took a slow breath, her voice calm. "Now we live the life she hoped for. With kindness. With peace. And maybe with each other?" He smiled softly, reached into his jacket, and pulled out the small ring box that had started it all. "The same one from the premiere." Sandra's eyes widened slightly, her hand covering her mouth as emotion returned all at once. "We were interrupted last time," he said, kneeling down, his voice quiet but steady. "But this time there's no stage, no cameras, no crowd. Just the truth." She couldn't speak. Tears ran freely down her face as he continued. "You've been the calm I never thought I'd find," he said softly. "And if love really means keeping someone's peace safe, then that's all I want to do for the rest of my life." Her lips trembled. "Keanu," she whispered. He opened the box, revealing the simple, elegant ring. "Will you let me keep that promise? Not for her, not for the world, but for us?" For a moment, the air seemed to stop moving. Sunlight spilled across the floor. Her eyes met his, and all the years of silence, pain, and unspoken love finally found their voice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will," he smiled, a small, quiet smile filled with peace. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against his. Outside, the world began to wake. But inside that quiet house, time stood still. Two souls, once broken by the noise of life, had finally found what her mother always wanted for them: peace, truth, and love that didn't need to be loud to last forever. And somewhere in the soft wind that moved through the open window, it almost sounded like her mother's voice, gentle, proud, and free. "Now you've kept the promise,"